Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Lamedalet. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with a braita that supports the opinion of Reish Lakish that we saw yesterday. That we saw that b'chol kodesh lo tiga is applying according to the second statement of Reish Lakish. We actually saw we can learn two things from it, but the one we're focusing on now is that it's a warning for someone who eats basar kodesh when they're impure. So here's our braita. B'chol kodesh lo tika. Asara lo. Okay, we're at the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, right? That's a warning for someone who eats it. Ataomer asara lo. You say this is a warning to someone who eats it. Oh, eno ela lenogam. Maybe it's for someone who touches it because it actually says b'chol kodesh lo tika. Don't touch. So what do we answer? Tamul lamal b'chol kodesh lo tika ve'el mikdash lo tavo. There's this juxtaposition in the pasuk between not touching sanctified items and not coming to the temple. Makish kodesh lemikdash. So we're going to compare those two things. Ma mikdash davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. If you go into the temple when you're impure, you get karet for it. Av kodesh davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. You're also going to have something that's going to give you a death penalty of karet if you eat the sanctified item. Now, even ogea, if you're going to say if it's by touching and not eating netilat neshama miika, there is no penalty of death. You don't get karet for touching a sanctified item when you're impure. Ela ba'achila, and therefore it must be talking about achila. Even though we saw the Reish Lakish also learns from their nigiyah, and that's because it used the language of nigiyah there, even though it really meant achila, and that teaches you also nigiyah, but it's not going to be karet, and it's not the real main crux of what the pasuk is talking about. But now we have another point, which is akate mibayle l'tamesh achal basar kodesh lefnei zrika. That pasuk is also used for another thing. It's also used to teach you, for Reish Lakish, for an impure person that eats basar, meat that's sanctified, before zrikata. Okay, we're going to talk about the difference in a minute. De itmar, as it says, tamesh achal basar kodesh lefnei zrika. Reish Lakish amar loke. He says you get lashes for it. You don't get karet for it. You only get karet once the blood was sprinkled. Because once the blood was sprinkled, what happens? The meat becomes permitted for people to eat, again, depending on whoever can eat that korban. But if you eat it when you're impure, you're going to get karet. Now, it's the time for eating, and if you eat it when you shouldn't, you're going to be karet. But if it's before zrika, where it's not even permitted yet to eat for anybody, you're actually not going to get karet for it, but according to Reish Lakish, you're going to get lashes. In a minute, we're going to see how he gets it from the pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan amar eno loke. He thinks you don't get lashes for this. So let's explain. They're the source for each. Reish Lakish amar loke b'chol kodesh lo tiga. Loshna lefnei zrika, loshna la'achar zrika. It says, don't touch any kodshim, which again means don't eat it. And it doesn't distinguish at all. So what's the difference? Whether it's before zrika, whether it's after zrika, it includes everything. And therefore, we have a warning in that pasuk, also teaching you that that's forbidden, and it's forbidden, you'll get lashes. Rabbi Yochanan amar eno loke. Why don't you get lashes? Kidetani bardila, like bardila's braita. At yetum ato tumato. Okay, if you look at Rashi says, right, tumato, that's where he gets the asara, tamesha lo yochal kodesh. We saw that in yesterday's daf. Alma asharato me onsho yalfa. He said, we're going to learn the warning from the punishment. Onsho la'achar zrikahu velo lifnei zrika. Now there, the prohibition is only after zrika. How do we know? Okay, so they quote this Gemara in Menachah. Rashi quotes it. I'm going to skip down a little bit in Rashi. Talmud lamal kol tahor yochal basal. It says there in the pasuk, anyone who's pure. This is Vayikra chapter 7. Anyone who's pure eats the meat. Notice they're talking about eating the meat. They're going to connect who can eat it, who can't. And when someone eats it, that's when someone's going to get karet if they don't eat it, right? It would be forbidden. And then it says, basar, etc. If you're impure, will get karet. So it basically says you're going to get karet if when the tower people are eating it and then you eat it in your tummy. So they connect that, and Rabbi Yochanan says, so it's not even forbidden. Okay, so just like the punishment is in karet, Reish Lakish agreed that the punishment is in karet for before zrika, but he said, since the punishment is karet for after zrika, we'll learn also that the punishment here is going to be even before zrika, that you'll get lashes, okay, but that it's forbidden. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that pasuk is only talking about a negative prohibition, about specifically when it can be eaten by other people. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Right, and that pasuk, that pasuk is after zrika. So then they say, im kain lemakra bikodesh, my bechol kodesh. So now, so this was really a question. because I didn't introduce this right. My mistake. When it said akate mebaile l'tamei shachal basar kodesh lifnei zrika, what they were really saying is, but wait, how can you learn from that pasuk lifnei zrika la'achar zrika if you're using that pasuk to teach you lifnei zrika? In other words, how could we learn two things from that pasuk? So they answer very simply, im ken lemakra bikodesh, my bechol kodesh maminatarte. It just should have said bikodesh lo tiga. Why did it say all kodesh lo tiga? Oh, it comes to teach you. You can learn both before Zrika and after Zrika. So my mistake for not addressing that this was a question to begin with. And now we answered the question. Okay, Gufa. Now we're going to go into this halacha we talked about. Tamesh achal basar kodesh lifnei Zrika. This machloket we just pointed out. Reish Lakish amar loket, Rabbi Yochanan amar eno loket. So now we're going to have a machloket Abaye and Rava about this machloket. Amar Rabbi, machloket betumat aguf. Okay, this actually they're both going to agree about, but the machloket is specifically if a person is tamei. That's the way we explained it. Aval betumat basal divrei hakol loket. So if the person is impure, we're going to have a machloket about between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Do you get lashes? Do you not get lashes? And when they eat sacrificial meat. But if the meat is impure and a regular person ate it, are they going to get lashes or not? Everyone agrees loke. Even Rabbi Yochanan thinks you get lashes. That's Abaye's understanding. Why? Da'amar kra vehabasal. Okay, this is Vayikra Zayin Yud Tet. Okay, it's the pasuk before v'tumato alav. Okay, it says habasal. Sorry, vehabasal, and the meat asher yiga b'chol tamei, that touches anything tamei. Lo yochal lo yachel ba'esh yisaref. Shouldn't be eaten. It will be burnt by fire. So now, vehabasar comes to include. Okay, this is talking about impure meat. Ilirabot eitzim ulivona. Okay, if the meat is tamei, that includes not only meat. Why does it say and the basar? And the basar comes to include not just basar, also things like other sacrificial items, like wood, okay, that's going to go on the fire, or livona, frankincense, it was designated to be burnt. Delav b'nei achila ninhu. Now notice, these can't be eaten, and yet, afilu hachi Rabbanit kra, and yet they're included in the prohibition. So what do you see? It's not about something that's permitted to others to eat and then you eat it that's going to make it right. That's the issue, that if the meat is impure, whether it doesn't matter whether it can be eaten, whether it can't be eaten, that's irrelevant. But if you eat basar kodesh before zrika and the meat was prohibited because it was tamei, and since we include also wood and all that, now there's no before zrika, after zrika by wood and frankincense. They're always ready to be eaten, or they're always or not ready, right? Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. They're not. There's no ever ready to be eaten. So because of that, we're going to say, look, they're included, and they don't have this whole thing going for it. So from there, we're going to learn that everyone agrees that this is all included in the pasuk. Also before zrika, if it's the meat. If it's a person, there's a machloket before zrika also or not. Okay, but if it's the meat, it's going to be prohibited, whether it's before or after zrika. Everyone agrees, and you'll get lashes. Rava Amal, he starts off the same as Abaye. Machloket b'tumat guf. He also thinks the machloket is tumat guf. So what could he be disagreeing about? Aval b'tumat basar divrei hakol eino loke. He says nobody thinks you get lashes for the meat before zrika. If the meat was impure and it's not even allowed for anyone to eat yet, no one's going to be prohibited to eat that. There's no lashes for it. It's not what the pasuk's talking about. Why? So he goes to the opposite extreme, that the basar, no one thinks you get lashes. Why not? My timer, kevan delo krina be v'tumato alav v'nichrita. Okay, now you can't say tumato alav v'nichrita. Why? Because that pasuk was talking about specifically after zrika. So that's only after zrika, that pasuk. Now, so since you can't say that, lo krina be v'abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yachel. Okay, just to put this in perspective, the first pasuk we quoted is Vayikra Zayin pasuk Kaf 20. The pasuk before pasuk 19 is where it says Abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yachel. So the pasuk before is talking about right Abasar asher yiga lo yachel be'esh yisaref, and the next pasuk is Hanefesh asher tochal basar mivzevach hashlamim asher Hashem v'tumato alav, which we explained that pasuk is talking about even. Is only talking about after zrika. So because of that, right, that we had tumato, right? We learned that from the one second. I just want to get back to one thing. Right. Kol tahor lo yochal basal. Sorry. Kol tahor yochal basal. I didn't quote that pasuk. That quote, that is, right. Second. Right. My mistake. At the end of Pasuk Yutet, I just didn't see it. At the end of Pasuk Yutet, it says, "Abasar sheyiga b'chol tamei lo yochal be'esh yisaref, ba'basar kol tahor yochal basar," and that's where it talks about every tahor yochal basar. And therefore, the next pasuk, "Hanefesh asher tochal mi basar zevach hashlamim vit right asher la'Hashem v'tumato alav v'nichrata." That karet pasuk is only when the person, other people can eat it. That's only after zrika. So the beginning of the pasuk before Abasar sheyiga is only then. Okay, so therefore, we're going to say basal, for sure the basar is not going to be an issue if, right, you're not going to say habasar sheiga, just now we're explaining is talking about specifically meat that's impure, can't be eaten. For sure it's only talking about after zrika. And that's Rava's opinion. Vaha marmar, what does he do with what Abaye said? Habasar l'rabot etzim u'levona. So what do you do with that? Once it includes etzim u'levona, and we said, well, they don't have this zrika before zrika, after zrika. There is no such thing. Well, hacha b'mayaskina kigon shekacho b'kli dinasa kimisha kervu kol metirav. They have a parallel. What's their parallel to zrika? When you put them in a clay kodesh, that sanctifies it, and that's like karvu kol metirav, that you did everything that you needed to do to permit, right? To permit it, to basically say this is complete, just like the zrika down permits the meat, right? This permits the rest of it, which basically means that only after that are you going to be forbidden, right? So the basar, including etzim and levonan, even though they don't have zrika, they have something parallel. And how do we know that this is an issue? Titnan, kol sheyesh lo mitirin, misha karvu mitirav. In other words, if you have mitirim, like the sprinkling of the blood, then it's all going to kick in once you once you did the mitirim, like brought the blood. If you don't have mitirim, then that same parallel situation, and this is the Mishnah, is misha kidesh b'kli, when it's sanctified in a vessel. So basically, we're going to say those have sanctification of a vessel. You can't say they don't have anything parallel. No, they do. So basically, we're going to say that both the meat and all the things we learn from it, it's once they're sanctified in a vessel, and for the meat, once the blood is sprinkled, that's when the Isur kicks in. For, again, that was the issue of, in this case, it's not really relevant for the Eitzim and Levona, but if you eat them, right, like you eat the meat while the meat is impure, okay, then you're going to get lashes. So, again, we're going to say that's not a difficulty, the Eitzim and Levona, because they do have a parallel. So you can't say, oh, they have no parallel, and therefore you can't learn anything from there. Okay, and that's what Abaye tried to say. So we have this big machloket Abaye and Rava. Both of them agree that the machloket between Abaye and Rava about tamesha chabasar kodesh before zrika, right? This whole thing that an impure person that eats it before zrika is all about an impure person. But if it, and then they have a machloket. But if it wasn't, if it was the meat itself was impure, either they both say you get lashes or they both say you don't get lashes. And they each understand this issue of the comparison to the levon in a bit of a different way, and the wood. Itmar. Okay, now another machlokah between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. We're continuing along in machlokot between them. Hama'aleh evrei behemat me'al gabei hamizbech. If you bring parts of an animal, of a non-kosher animal onto the altar, right? Can you imagine? I mean, bring a non-kosher animal into the Beit HaMikdash, right? Sounds horrible. And you put them up on the altar. What happens? So Reish Lakish amar lokeh. Rabbi Yochanan amar eino lokeh. Surprisingly, Rabbi Yochanan says there's no lashes here for you. So, Reish Lakish amar lokeh, what's his reason? Chehora ins me'alo. Okay, well, you have to go back and see what pasuk they're talking about. They're talking about a pasuk that says, Mina bakar or mina tzon takrivu, right? When you want to bring a korban, bring it from the bakar or from the tzon. And now they're going to say, that teaches you from a kosher animal and not a non-kosher animal. And lav haba michla. Now, how do you get to lashes then? Well, Reish Lakish holds, now it doesn't say don't do something. Lashes are always given for a negative prohibition. Well, lav haba michla say lokina lav. Reish Lakish holds a negative that comes from a positive. And this is a positive. Bring it from these animals. Don't bring it from non-kosher animals. Again, it doesn't say that in the pasuk, but you can infer from the yes what you can do. You can infer what you can't do, and you get lashes for something like that. And Rabbi Yochanan amar ein lokin alav. Rabbi Yochanan says, what are you talking about? You don't get lashes on that. Lav haba michlala say ein lokin alav. When you have a negative commandment that comes from a positive wording of something. You don't get lashes. You only get lashes for negative prohibitions. It's pretty basic. And in fact, we're going to have a question against Reish Lakish. Mativ Rabbi Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah says, look at this pasuk. Ototochelu. These are what are the kosher animals that you can eat. What's the drasha? V'lo behemat me'ah. Not non-kosher animals. The lava b'michlal aseh. And this is a negative that comes from a positive. And it's only just considered like a keeping a mitzvah aseh because it's only worded in the positive. Our mitzvah is to eat kosher food. Yes, we're not allowed to not eat kosher food, non-kosher food, but we don't get lashes for it. So Amalei Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlefa. He says, you're right. Okay, it was explained to me that Reish Lakish doesn't really disagree. He thinks that lava b'michlal aseh is not a mitzvah lo taseh. It actually has the status of an aseh. You're not going to get lashes for bringing a non-kosher animal onto the altar. Interestingly. But ki pligi b'chaya. What's the machloket? What if you bring a chaya on the altar? Now, you're supposed to bring minatzon u'min bakar. Now, that means from cattle, sheep. What is it not? It's not undomesticated animals. Those are all domesticated animals. You can't bring undomesticated animals, like a deer, okay? So you can't bring those. So now we're going to see. Ki pligi b'chaya. Their machloket is about a chaya. V'hachi yitmar. This is really the machloket. Now, you got it all wrong. Also, what the machloket is about and who said what. So Rabbi Yochanan actually says the same. Rabbi Yochanan amar over ba'aseh. Now again, we're going to say minatzonu min bakar is not coming to say not non-kosher animals. It's coming to say, I mean, maybe also, but it's also coming to say not chayot. Now, when it comes to the not non-kosher animals, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both agree. If you bring a non-kosher animal on the altar, it's forbidden, but it only comes out from a positive commandment, so you won't get lashes. What if you bring a chaya, an undomesticated animal? Now, we assume, okay, they're kosher non-domesticated animal, so it's not so bad. Right? We're going to obviously be more lenient about this. So Rabbi Yochanan actually says the same thing, though. Over ba'aseh, same thing. You transgressed. You didn't keep a positive commandment. Reish Lakish amar ein over below klum. You didn't do anything wrong, and in fact, you could actually bring them on the altar, even though we don't really. So Rabbi Yochanan omer over ba'aseh behema in chaya lo, because he darshans. It says bring it from the tzon, bring it from the bakar, not from a chaya. Reish Lakish amar ein over alav below klum ha'ula mitzvah. He says, okay, that's just to say ideally you should bring, a shiur, a kesev, an ez, all those animals we know about. But if you bring a chaya, it's okay. Mativ Rava. Rava says, wait a minute. Ilu ne'emal korban lashem behema. If it said a behema, hayiti omer, chaya b'chlal behema, right? Often it says animal in the Torah, and animal could mean domesticated and non-domesticated. But kinyan shne'emar, zot, right? And just like zot behema asher tuchlu. This is the animals you can eat, and that includes shiur, sekvasim, v'seizim, ayal, v'tzvi. Okay, that includes all sorts of animals, including the domesticated ones, the sheep and the goats and the bull, the sheep, the goat, and the ram and the deer. But Talmud Lamau, it didn't say behema here. It said bakar v'tzon. To tell you, bakar v'tzon amarti l'cha v'lo chaya. I said only bakar and tzon, not a chaya. So this is against Reish Lakish, who wanted to say, well, you could do it even though it's not the ideal. You might have thought you can't bring, but if you did, it's okay. Like Reish Lakish said, and others again. This is a braita coming to go against Reish Lakish because it's clearly going to say no. What is this like? Well, so the rabbi says to the student, go bring me wheat. And he brings him wheat and barley. That's actually not so bad because okay, you did what your teacher said, and then you did more. That's fine. But Talmud Lamal bakar v'tzon. That's why it says here specifically bakar v'tzon. Why? Bakar v'tzon amarti l'cha v'lo chaya. Because God's saying, I want you to bring bakar and tzon. I don't want you bringing other things, not undomesticated animals. Halamazadume. What is that like? This is more like l'tamid shamar lo rabo al tavili ela chitim. Okay, so it's more like a teacher that says to the student, bring me only wheat. And then he didn't bring only wheat. He brought barley, wheat and barley. Now in that case, he's really going against what his teacher told him, and that's what it's like when we bring animals on the altar. Upasul. and it's disqualified. Tiyuvta de Reish Lakish, tiyuvta, and we end with, this is really a difficulty against Reish Lakish, who we basically said that he said that you could bring chayot. There's no problem at all. Remember, first we thought he said you're going to get lashes if you bring non-kosher animals on the altar, but then we rejected that. We said he's actually more lenient than Rabbi Yochanan in this case, and he says if you bring chayot, it's actually totally permitted. And then they say that really doesn't make any sense, certainly not in light of this bright time. Vikulan shekiblu. Okay, now we're back to the words of the Mishnah. Vikulan shekiblu et adam chutz lezmano v'chutz lemkomo im yesh dam hanefesh yachzor akasher v'yikabel. Right. So if they accepted the blood with the intent it's going to be done in the wrong time or in the wrong place. If there's still blood inside, they go and they redo it. Okay, we're going to talk a bunch about redoing. First, we're going to ask this question. Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Pasul ma'u she'aseh shirayim. Okay, what is this? Shirayim. Okay, shirayim is a little confusing, and we're going to use this shirayim term in two different ways. We're going to actually have three versions of this question. Okay, the first two think that it was Reish Lakish who asked Rabbi Yochanan. The third one's going to say it was actually a question that Abaye asked Rava. Okay, like totally something different. And the shirayim are going to mean something completely different. Shirayim could be the extra blood that you pour on the altar. That's going to be in the third interpretation. But here what they mean shirayim is that if a pasul person, okay, does the avoda in the temple, okay, like accepting the blood or sprinkling the blood, can someone fix the issue, like what we talked about in the Mishnah? Or do we say once the blood was sprinkled, this is how Rashi understands the question, kevan shezarak pasul, since the blood was sprinkled by someone who's disqualified, do we say that at this point, once someone disqualified sprinkles the blood, there's nothing you could do. You can't go back and take more blood and do it again. It's completely disqualified. Or not. Shirayim means remainder that we have nothing to do with, okay, that we can't use. So that's the question. Amar lahu, ein oseh shirayim ela chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo. Ho'il u'meratzeh l'pigulo. Says the following. The only time we make shirayim that is completely disqualified is chutz lizmano and chutz limkomo machshava. Okay, not a pasul person, but pasul intent. Okay, here we see how intent is much worse. Why? Because it's meratzeh l'pigulo. What does that mean? If you had a pigul machshava during shchita, let's say, and then you never sprinkled the blood, you just never went ahead with the rest of it, and then you eat the meat from there, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not pigul. What's meratzeh l'pigulo means that the sprinkling of the blood is what turns this meat into pigul meat. Okay, so if I have a pigul thought while I'm doing shchita, let's say that I'm going to sprinkle the blood or eat the meat or whatever it is outside the time, but I never go ahead with finishing the sprinkling of the blood, then it's not anything. But what does this show? If I sprinkle the blood after that, whether my pigul machshava was during the sprinkling of the blood or it was earlier, it doesn't matter. If I sprinkle the blood, then at that moment, that is what creates the chalut, the pigul name on this meat. Okay? So now, because of that, now even chutz l'komo, it's disqualified, right? It's not pigul that you don't get karet, but it is kind of pigul. Anyway, that only works with chutz l'zmano and chutz l'komo, where the zrika affects the pigul, basically. It causes the pigul to take effect. So therefore, that's when it disqualifies. If you sprinkle the blood, okay, not right, kulam shekiblu et adam chutz l'zmano chutz l'komo, you can redo it, but once the sprinkling of the blood is done, it's too late. But not so for a pasul. If a pasul does it, it doesn't make shirayim, it doesn't ruin the rest of the blood from being used, because the sprinkling of blood is not as essential in that situation. Rabbi Matnehach, he has a different version. Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Kos pasul ma'u she'aseh shirayim. What if I put it in a kos that was disqualified? Let's say the kos was impure, the cup, and I collected the blood in the wrong cup. Is that it for the blood? Can't do anything? I can't fix it? Amar le psul gufei maisvir le. Now he answers his question with a question. It's very good. So he says, okay, Rabbi Yochanan answers Reish Lakish. He says, listen, you didn't ask me about psul gufe, what if the person's pasul? You asked me, what if the cup is pasul? Which makes me think that you know the answer to that question because you didn't ask that. So we basically answer something like this. There's no difference between a person being pasul and the cup being pasul and the blood being, either collected in the cup by the um, by the sprinkling by the person who's pasul, or from a cup that was pasul. So he says, "I pasul mishavish shirayim, kos pasul nami mishavish shirayim. I pasul lo mishavish shirayim, kos pasul nami lo mishavish shirayim." So whichever one you say, if you say the person, what must have been obvious to you, okay, if you say that is that was pasul, then this will be pasul also, and that you can't do it again, right? That you can't fix it. And if you say you can fix it, then you can fix this as well. Case or version 3. Rav Yomi difti mat nehachi. He had a different version. Ba'an as I told you before, it's now going to be Abaye and Rava, not Rabbi Yochanan, not Reish Lakish, but Rabbi Yochanan. Kos ma'u she'aset chavero dachoy o shirayim. Now, here we're going to have a case where you took the blood from a sin offering, Rashi gives an example of, in 2 cups. And then what did you do? You took 1 cup's worth and you put all the blood around the 4 corners of the altar. And then do we say you didn't use the 2nd cup at all? So, does that mean, well, you rejected it because you didn't use it? Now, anything rejected in the temple is rejected completely. So since you chose cup 1 and you left cup 2 is dachoy, can't ever be used. Or, now what would you do with it anyway? You finish putting the blood on the corners of the altar, but what do you do with the extra blood? You pour it into the Yesod HaMizbeach. That's called the Shirayim. That's why I told you we're going to have a different interpretation of Shirayim here. Or do we say it's dachoy or Shirayim? Or is this considered extra blood? Because usually what you do is you put it in the 4 corners, and then whatever blood is left, you dump into the corner of the altar. So what about what's left in the 2nd cup? Is it dachoy? Is it rejected? Or do you put it in the base of the altar? Do you pour it there? Is it the Shirayim? Right? In the previous 2 questions, Shirayim was something bad that means it's ruined, can't be used again. This is actually something that can be used, so it's totally different Shirayim. Shirayim literally means remainder. So Amar Le Plukta to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan. It's Machlok Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan, and let's see. Ditanya, here's a braita. Lemala hu omer et amo yishpoch. Lemata hu omer ve'et kol dama yishpoch. Okay, these are 2 different psukim. One of Vayikra Daled Kafhe, one of Vayikra Daled Lamed. Okay, it's talking about the chatat. So he takes the chatat be'etzba'o and he puts it et damo yishpoch yesod mizbeach. Okay, after he puts it around the 4 corners, it says in the pasuk, then an extra he pours. Another pasuk says he takes from the dama be'etzba'o v'natano kano mizbach ha'olah ve'et kol dama yishpoch yesod mizbeach. Okay, one is about the nasi and one is about the individual. These are those psukim that we learned in Horayot. So the second is the individual. And there it says, all the dam he will spill. So one says the blood he will spill. The other one says all the blood he will spill. So when it talks about the nasi, it's the blood. It talks about the individual, it's all the blood. Okay. So it's a little bit of a contradiction. Do you do all the blood or some of the blood? So in one says that, one says that. Minayin lechatat shekibel dama ba'arba'a kosot. So how do you get that? If you do a chatat and let's say you collected the blood in 4 cups. And each corner you use a different of the 4 cups. How do you know that everything gets dumped in the yesod, in the base of the altar? Talmud lomar ve'et kol dama yishpoch. It says all the blood. All the blood means from all the 4 cups that you used to put, each one was used. So each one gets spilled. Yachol natan arba matanot b'kos echad. Yukulan ishbachin liyesod. What if you did the arba matanot, though, from only 1 cup? You put the blood in 4 cups, but you only put around all 4 corners with 1 cup's worth. How do you know that you don't pour everything in the yesod? Talmud lomar ve'etamo. Etamo means not all the blood. Haketzad, how does it work? Hu nishpach liyesod. The one is poured in the yesod. Ve'he nishpachin laman. They get poured at this channel that was on the floor where they would put all the extra blood and it would all take it out to Nachal Kidron. It was like a place for kind of all the waste. And the waste would kind of go through this channel and leave the temple area. So that's Tanakama's position, that if you didn't use that cup, it's dachoy basically, and you don't use it as shirayim. But we said it's machloket. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, in other words, Abaye asked Rabbi this question, and then Basically, Rabbi answered, oh, it's a machloka between them that we see in this bright. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, Minayin lechatat shekibel damar ba'arba'a kosot. Same thing. You collected in 4 cups. V'natan arba matanot mikos echad shekulan ishbachin liyisod, and you did all 4 from 1 cup. How do you know that they all get poured in the base? Talmud lomar ve'et kodam ha'yishbach. It says all the blood gets spilled. All the blood gets poured into the yisod. That means all the blood, even from all the 4 cups that you didn't even use 3 of them. It's not dachoy. This he holds it's shirayim. Obviously, the last question for him is, "V'haktiv etam o yishpoch." What does he do with the pasuk that says, "In the blood you spill not all the blood"? So what does he do with that? Amrav Ashi hahul miuti shirayim shebetzavar beima. That's to say, everything that was collected in a cup gets poured. What's the damo though? Not all the dam, because any dam that was still left in the animal that wasn't collected in the cup, that we don't collect at any point later and put it in the yisod. Only what was collected in a cup goes in the yisod. So that's the answer to the question. It's a machloket. Kibel akasher v'natan pasul. Okay, now we have the next section, the Mishnah, which talked about the redoing again. You gave it to a kasher, and then he gave it back, and he gave it to a pasul, and then the pasul, right, the disqualified person gives it back to the kohen, right? The kohen will take it from him, and then continue the process, right, to bring it to the altar. Then we had, if you did it with yamino, you put it in your right hand and then you switch it to your left hand, so you put it back in your right hand and you keep going. Or you took it in a clay kodesh, in a sanctified vessel, then you poured it into a clay chol, a non-sanctified vessel, and you put it back into a clay kodesh. It's fine. All those cases, they can be fixed, basically. So now, then you want to know, utzricha, why did you need all 3 cases? Well, the di'yesh minam pasul, havamina, my pasul, if you had the first case about a person who was disqualified, you might have thought, what's a pasul? Tameh, right? Like one of the examples of a pasul person is someone who's impure. Now, what do we know about impurity? If Chuma Hutrabit Tzibor, we talked about this a bunch of times, if the majority of the community is impure, then you can even, or the majority of the Kohanim are impure, they can sacrifice korbanot tzibor, communal offerings. So there's some way we're going to allow Tameh to do things. So therefore, maybe you'd say in that case, it didn't ruin it because it could be redone. And, because it's not so bad, because there is a case where it's permitted. Even though this isn't the case it's permitted, but there is a case it's permitted. Aval small, low, but small is never permitted. So you might have thought not. Well, yeshmin and small, if you had said specifically with the left hand, what would I have said? Yom Kippur is one of the days, the one day a year where we allow one of the avodot to be done with the left hand. What is that? The Kohen Gadol brings the machta, the coals, he brings the incense with a pan with coals into the kodesh kodeshim. So in one hand, in the right hand, he's got the pan. How is he going to hold the ketoret, the incense? He has no choice. The incense is in a little spoon or a big spoon, and he basically has to take it in his left hand because he has no choice. He can't put 2 in one hand, so he carries them in, and he can do it in his left hand. So since there is a situation where it's allowed, maybe that means it's not so bad. Okay, and therefore, you might say about klei chol. So we have a heter for tuma because it's hutra b'tzibor, so that would include a pasul. We have a heter for small, but we don't have any heter for klei chol. You can never have anything that's not in a sanctified vessel. Well, yeshmin and klei chol mishum dechazi lekadushinu. Well, a klei chol you can always fix later. You can always sanctify it, so it's not so bad. It's not like it's got something wrong with it, like it's impure or it's the left hand, which we don't allow. But it actually could be turned into. You can sanctify a klei chol. Maybe you wouldn't think the others. That's why you need sricha. You need them all. Now they say, why do we say that it's rejected? Why do we allow all these situations and not say, wait, but they're rejected? In other words, you gave it to a pasul, you put it in the left hand, you put it in a klei chol, it should be rejected. And once things rejected momentarily, right, even for a moment, it can't be used anymore. So why don't we say that in these situations? Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi Hacha Amar Rav Yomi Amidifti Mishmei Rava. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, this is what Rav Yomi Amidifti said in the name of Rava. Hamani, who does this follow our Mishnah? Chanana Mitzrihu delately dechuyin. Chanana Mitzri doesn't hold by dachoy, and that must just match his opinion. And if you really hold by dachoy, it's not going to work. How do we know this? Okay, don't worry, there'll be another answer. Ditan Yochanan Mitzri Omer Afilu Dam Bikos. Now we're into Yom Kippur, the Seir. You have the 2 seirim that we did the goral and we picked which seir goes for which. And then if you have the blood in the cup from the seir that you're supposed to do, and then the animal. If the afilu dam biyado, 1 second, dam seir nasav ifnim bakos, right, and the seir mishtalech dies, the other seir that's supposed to go sent off dies, mevi chaveron mezavik. Even though the blood's already in the cup and the seir mishalach dies, we allow you to continue going ahead with that. We don't say you have to start again. You just bring another seir mishalach. You wait till you get another seir. You bring it, and that's fine. You just continue on with what you were doing. Nothing's disqualified by the fact that the seir died. That shows, even though momentarily you couldn't bring that seir, the blood of the seir, because you didn't have the parallel, the goat, the other goat, you have these two goats, you didn't have the parallel one, so you couldn't bring it temporarily, but you can bring it after you fix the problem by getting another seir. So he holds that, and that must be his opinion. Rav Ashi Amar, kosher biyado lo have dichui. If you can fix something, it's not dachui. And that's what all these situations are. These can easily be fixed. Just have the pasul give it back to the Kohen. Move it into your right hand. Put it into a clay kodesh. Amar Rav Shia kavated Rav Ashi b'stabri. He says, I think Rav Ashi has it right. Man shamat leidi leidechuyin Rabbi Yehuda. Because who's the one who says dachoy? Rabbi Yehuda. And then we're going to prove that Rabbi Yehuda, even though he says there's dachoy, he's also thinks that if you can fix the problem, though, it's not dachoy. So first we have to establish he's the one who says dachoy, and then we're going to prove his opinion, and then we're going to be able to explain Rav Ashi, or support Rav Ashi. Ditnan. As it says in the Mishnah, V'odamar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda also says, Nishpach Hadam Yamut HaMishtalech. He disagrees. There you have dachoy. If the blood was spilled, this is a different case. If the blood was spilled, then the seir mishtalech has to be left to die. Because if you spill the blood by accident of the seir that's supposed to bring the blood inside to the kodesh kodeshim, if you spill it, you've ruined your two sacrifices. And you've ruined that sacrifice, and you've ruined the seir that's going to be sent off to Azazel. There are two sacrifices. One is sacrifice, one is not. So, nishpach adam yamud mishtalech, meta mishtalech yishafech adam. And if the mishtalech dies, that was the case we saw before, then you have to spill the blood and you have to start all over again. So that's dachoy. Vishaminale, and we know that he says, we heard that he says, Kol shebiyado lo havi dichoy. How do we know this? Titanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kos echad hayam malay midam ta'arovet, v'zorko zricha achad keneged hayesod. This is what they would do on Pesach. On Pesach, there were a lot of people in the temple, and it was super busy. And there was a lot of commotion because all of the Jewish people were there sacrificing their korbanot. And all the Israelim came in and sacrificed their own korban, right? They slaughtered their own korban Pesach. Then the Kohanim did the other jobs. But can you imagine the halabalu? And not only that, you can only do it for the afternoon of the 14th. And you have that one afternoon. It's not the longest day. So what was the concern? The concern was that a lot of the blood would get spilled on the floor. And not all the blood necessarily of every korban Pesach was going to be sacrificed. But that can't happen. You obviously have to have the blood. So what was the solution they came up with? Now let's read again. Rabbi Yehuda says they would take kosachad, they would take 1 cup. Hayam mimalei midam ta'arovet. They would go to the floor where the blood was collected on the floor, all this spilled blood. They would scoop up a cup of blood from there, and it's a ta'arovet. We assume that everybody's, that cup of blood must have blood from all the sacrifices because the blood just sort of gets all mixed up together. And any cup you take is going to basically cover all the sacrifices that might have spilled all on the floor. And the yesod was the place where they would also sprinkle the blood of the korban pesach. So they would do 1 zrika from this cup at the yesod of the altar, the base, so that they would fulfill the obligation for anyone whose blood had spilled. So what do you see here? If it can be fixed, shmamina, kol shebiyado lo havi dichoy shmamina. And this is Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, as long as it can be fixed, it's not rejected, because the stuff that fell on the floor must have been rejected, right? But it wasn't rejected because it can be fixed. So that's a different way to explain the Mishnah, that you don't have to say, oh, it just holds by this outlier position of Hanan Mitzri, who doesn't hold dachoy. No, it is dachoy, but this particular isn't dachoy because it can be fixed. Gufa. Now we're just going to go into this, although we're going to do more of this tomorrow. We'll just start today. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kosach harayam memalei midam ta'arovet, she'im yishapech mehem nimtza shu machshiro, right? That if one of them got spilled, so this would fix the problem. Amru la Rabbi Yehuda v'alo nitkabel b'kli, but it wasn't, right? We're assuming this blood just got spilled straight from the animals onto the floor and wasn't even in a vessel. So it wasn't in a vessel. So how can you say this? So they say minayade. How do you know it wasn't in a vessel? Maybe it wasn't a vessel. It spilled from the vessel. So they say, Ela Shem alone is kabel b'kli, but don't you have to worry that maybe it was never in a vessel? If it's not in a vessel, it had to have gone in a vessel in order for this to be considered valid. And this fell on the floor before it went into a vessel, which wouldn't work. So we're in the middle of this question. We're going to get back to this in tomorrow's stuff. Okay, so what do we have today? We started with this first machloket, or one of the machlokot, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, about the eating, right? Asara lo ochel basar kodesh minayin. We brought a brayta to support that. From them, we had a question, but don't we need that pasuk for something else? B'chol kodesh lo tiga. Don't we need it for before Zrika? And then we said, no, you can actually learn before Zrika and after Zrika because it says b'chol kodesh. Then we got to this halacha about Tamei shachal basar lifnei zrika. Okay, we went more in depth into the machloket between him and Rabbi Yochanan, and we had two options for understanding the machloket. Abaye and Rava, who both think the machloket is netumat aguf, but what about if the basar was tamei and it was before zrika? We had a machloket whether everyone agrees you get lashes or everyone agrees you don't get lashes. Then we got to this pasuk minatzonu minabakar, and the first drasha we had was but not non-kosher animals. And then we had a machloket whether you get lashes for non-kosher animals going on the altar. And then we said, oh, nobody really thinks you get lashes for it because it's a lava b'michal laseh, and nobody really thinks, even though we thought, Reish Lakish maybe thought you get lashes. No, that's not it. And then we changed it to that the machloket's really about if you put a chaya on the altar, is that totally okay, even though you're not ideal, but it's totally fine according to Reish Lakish, and you haven't done anything wrong? Or Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's really not okay. You just don't get lashes for it. And then we said, right, it's a bitul aseh, but not that. And then we said, but there's a total difficulty on Reish Lakish from this because it says very clearly that that's not what God asked for, and you're not supposed to bring them on the altar. And we basically said, yeah, Reish Lakish is difficult. Then we got to these possible three questions about whether if something is disqualified, can you not fix it, right? If a non correct person did the zrika, disqualified person, does that mean you can't use the rest of the blood anymore and fix the korban? Or does it mean, right, which we said actually you could? Then we said only if a psul of chutzlas mano chutzim komo would ruin it. Rav Zvid had a different version that the question was pasul, kos pasul, would that make shirayim? And then basically he answered, well, whatever you say about a person pasul, that's what you'd say about a kos pasul, which really ends up without really much of an answer. And then the third version was Abaye asked Rava the question, and of course, can it make if you didn't use that cup at all, used a different cup, and you use this one at all, is it dachoy, or can you use it to pour in the Yesod Mizbeach? And we said that's machloket Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, which we showed the two different opinions there. And then we ended with the three cases you can fix according to the Mishnah, and then the question was, well, why do you need all three cases? What does each one tell you? And then why aren't they rejected? Either it's Hanan Mitzri or it's Rabbi Yehuda who actually says, right, either it's Hanan Mitzri who holds there is no dachui, or it's Rabbi Yehuda who holds that even though it's dachui, you can actually fix it, because if it's biyado, it's not really dachui. Okay, dachui does not apply when you can actually fix it yourself. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.